my soil knife, but it really cuts branches like a fucking thing.
Here's Johnny.
Hi, Forcing Climate Info. Give that person a hand. I don't have any side effects out here. They got a channel now showing all kinds of shit. You know, if this is the more people, the merrier in this genre that are going to show the truth and you know, put the pieces together.
A former port worker told the Guardian newspaper he warned for years it was a disaster waiting to happen and says nothing was done.
A massive destabilization of methane hydrates in the maximum warning phase of the Eemian period, 125,000 to 126,000 years ago. Titled Evidence for Massive Methane Hydrate Destabilization During the Penultimate Interglacial Warming, the significance portion of the paper points to, quote, strong evidence of methane release and oxidation, almost certainly due to massive methane hydrate destabilization during the early part of the penultimate warm episode, 126,000 to 125,000 years ago. End quote. The abstract reports, quote, we focused on the early part of the penultimate interglacial and present a hitherto undocumented and remarkably large intermediate water warming of 6.8 degrees C in response to a brief episode of meltwater-induced, modest Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, weakening centered at 126,000 to 125,000 years ago, end quote. Most people watching this video are familiar with the Gulf Stream, which is the surface part of the AMOC in the North Atlantic. Again, I turn to the abstract. Quote, the warming of intermediate waters to 14 degrees C significantly exceeds the stability field of methane hydrates, end quote. The abstract concludes with that the warming, quote, was almost certainly the result of massive destabilization of methane hydrates. This study documents and connects a sequence of climatic events and climatic feedback processes associated with and triggered by the penultimate climate warming that can serve as a paleo analog for modern ongoing warming, end quote. Yes, it certainly, quote, can serve as a paleo analog for modern ongoing warming, end quote. Release of abundant methane into the atmosphere happened in the past. It can happen today. Indeed, it seems such a release is already underway. Additional context is probably needed. According to a peer-reviewed paper by James Hansen and 14 other colleagues published in Earth System Dynamics on July 18, 2017, Earth is at its highest temperature since the Eemian, meaning the highest temperature with any civilization present. I can assure you that the global temperature has not cooled during the last 5 years. This paper, published late last month in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, indicates the means by which methane can be released rapidly into the atmosphere, with rapid planetary heating to follow. In other words, people claiming that the so-called methane bomb cannot be triggered are incorrect. These people include, of course, Michael Mann and other people claiming to be knowledgeable about climate change. Here's a little more context. Current Siberian heating is unprecedented during the last 7 millennia. This, according to a peer-reviewed paper in Nature Communications, published on August 25, 2022, written by Rashid Kantemirov and 11 other scholars. The paper's abstract includes these lines, quote, we demonstrate that the recent anthropogenic warming interrupted a multi-millennial cooling trend. We find the industrial era warming to be unprecedented in rate and to have elevated the summer temperature to levels above those reconstructed for the past 7 millennia, in both 30-year mean and the frequency of extreme summers. This is undoubtedly of concern for the natural and human systems that are being impacted by climatic changes that lie outside the envelope of natural climatic variations for this region, end quote. Let me repeat that last sentence. Quote, This is undoubtedly of concern for the natural and human systems that are being impacted by climatic changes that lie outside the envelope of natural climatic variations for this region. End quote. Despite raising the issue of concern, this recent paper in Nature Communications fails to cite earlier relevant work. Specifically, an important paper published on February 10, 2009 in the prestigious Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences was somehow missed by the 12 authors of this paper in Nature Communications. The paper published in February 2009, written by Susan Solomon and colleagues, is titled Irreversible Climate Change Due to Carbon Dioxide Emissions. It includes this information in the abstract. Quote, this paper shows that the climate change that takes place due to increases in carbon dioxide concentration is largely irreversible for 1,000 years after emissions stop. Following cessation of emissions, removal of atmospheric carbon dioxide decreases radiative forcing, but is largely compensated by slower loss of heat to the ocean, so that atmospheric temperatures do not drop significantly for at least 1,000 years. End quote. In other words, we have known for more than a decade, based on the conservative peer-reviewed literature, that climate change is irreversible for at least the next 1,000 years. Based on recent papers in prestigious and conservative peer-reviewed journals, we know that methane can rapidly warm Earth, and that it already has. We know that maintenance of civilization depends upon maintaining the relatively cool planetary temperature necessary to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale. We know that a reduction in industrial activity leads to rapid planetary heating. We also know that such a rapid rate of environmental change will cause Earth to lose habitat for humans and most, if not all, other life. Please remember that I am quoting the work of other scholars. And also, please remember that I am criticized for not doing my own primary research. No, really, I couldn't make up this nonsense. I've pointed out the cost of lies earlier in this space. I've also quoted from John Kenneth Galbraith's 1977 book, The Age of Uncertainty. Quote, people of privilege will always risk their complete destruction rather than surrender any material part of their advantage. End quote. It seems we are paying the ultimate cost for the lies told during the last century. Maybe it's been longer. Let's not stress about the details. That's nonsense, spelled S-H-I-T.
Ice. So you've got the sea ice, which in that Arctic region reflects a lot of sunlight away, and so the sea ice is now reducing. And again, just help me with the numbers here. I'm reading, I think, that if we lost all of the sea ice in the summer period, then the amount of additional heat that would be penetrating into the Earth system as opposed to bouncing off back into space is equivalent to 1/3 of the total energy budget, or some ridiculously large number like that. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, because with the ice gone, much more of the solar heat is retained by the planet because it's darker. Suddenly you have dark sea, dark land, where you used to have ice and snow, and that produces a permanent effect again on the planet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, of course, as the water heats up, and I was looking at I was watching one of the videos that you were presenting and some slides that had it looked like a sonar of the seafloor, that had, it's the East Siberian Shelf, Arctic Shelf, ESAS, that was around 70 meters deep, if I remember correctly, but there was a thin layer of, sediment, but below that you're saying kilometers of methane hydrates?
Yes, it's one of the biggest threats that the world faces, but of course, it's not facing it. It's the fact that underneath the seabed in the Arctic shelf regions, that's the Siberian Sea and Laptev Sea, you have this very thick layer of sediment, 2 or 3 kilometers thick, which is not strictly sediment, it's actually methane dissolved in water, form a kind of compound called methane hydrate.
Yeah.
And that stuff it's okay, it stays there so long as there's something on top of it to hold it down. That's the
metro stations flood in just a matter of minutes
before
even reaching the
but once that
platform where they
permafrost
stop.
starts to melt,
Those outside had to brave gusts of winds that
all of
reached
that
100 kilometers
methane
an
is
hour
going
on
to
top
start
of the Eiffel
coming
Tower.
out, it's going to turn
So
itself
strong
back
that this
into
roof
gas
nearly blew
Yeah.
away.
and come out.
While
It's already
scientists and
doing
vehicles
that. We've
travelled
already got
cautiously along roads transformed
nasty
into
sonar
rivers,
pictures which you
dodging
must have
debris
seen.
along
Yeah.
the way.
Huge masses
49
of
millimetres of
methane
rain
gas
fell in just
coming out,
1
and the
hour,
fact
the
that methane
equivalent of a
levels in the
month's
atmosphere are
rainfall.
rising more rapidly than ever before is probably the extra methane is probably coming from these Arctic sources.
Okay, and this East Siberian Sea is the area, is that correct, around here where I'm showing on the map?
Yes. Not sure if I can point to it, but it's where you're starting from. If you follow round the rough Siberian coast,
All the way
right
around,
right up to where it comes to an end. That's the East Siberian Sea at the top there.
Okay.
And then you've got the Laptev Sea, the Kara Sea, but all those seas, as you can see from the map, the odd thing about them is that the water depth is very shallow,
Yeah.
about 50 to 100 meters, and that allows the methane to come out.
Yeah.
Where you have deeper water, like in the center of the Arctic Ocean, then any methane that comes out doesn't actually get into the air, it dissolves again in the water.
Right.
But if the water depth is shallow, then you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. And there's a concept called I understand the clathrate gun hypothesis that says that conditions could be in such a way that you'll have this massive burst of this methane, that there'll be like this really rapid positive feedback. Is the concern that this stuff could go off like fast, or is this one of those just slow time thing that's just going to go on and on and on for generations?
No, I think it's possibly going to go fast, and this is one of those things where the climate, the sort of basic climate people are complacent about that as about everything, and don't realise this could happen very, very suddenly. And it's the fact that the permafrost layer that holds it all down is actually melting.
Right.
And once that layer is melted, or once the pressure of the methane underneath works its way through the overlying permafrost, then you've got, we don't know what it will be, but it will be pretty violent and quite immediate, that within a short time, maybe a year or two, the whole of this methane held in the sediments could come out.
Yeah.
And you get a gigantic obvious burst of methane, but also that would cause sudden warming of the whole planet.
Yeah.
The estimates are 1 to 2 degrees, which is well, in itself doesn't sound a lot, but if it all happens at once, it is.
Yeah, and so you add the 1 to 2 degrees on top of the 1 degree that we've already got, and then you're.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, can we go to the other side of the planet, which of course we can do in seconds with this technology, down to the Antarctic, where obviously, so it's very different in the Antarctic, predominantly because most of the white stuff you see there is actually sitting on land and surrounded by ocean, as opposed to ocean surrounded by land. Is there some big fundamental difference in the way that this global heating is affecting the Antarctic versus the Arctic?
Yes, there seems to be. The Antarctic has been warming more slowly than the Arctic, and I think it's the modifying effects that of being surrounded by very deep ocean, stretching out to the edge of the world, and it's slowed down the amount of heating that's been happening in Antarctica, but it hasn't slowed it to zero. And one of the things that's been happening is that the most sensitive part of the Antarctic seems to be the ice shelves, which are where the ice sheet itself has sort of squeezed itself out so that it's sitting over water. And that is unstable, liable to break up. So we've had several cases of complete ice shelves breaking out on the Antarctic Peninsula, and now we've got a danger of an ice shelf further around the coast breaking out. So if an ice shelf breaks out, in itself, if the ice shelf was already afloat, it doesn't affect sea level. But in fact, it does, because usually the ice shelf is tied to the coastline, and if it breaks up and moves out, then that affects the general global sea level.
Yeah. Okay. And because of that, like you say, so we've got a deep ocean surrounding the ice, as opposed to shallow seas on the periphery of a. And so is it safe to say that the southern hemisphere is just going to suffer less of the dramatic changes as a result of that sort of stabilizing influence of the Antarctic?
Yes, I think it's not going to be suffering less, but it will suffer more slowly. I think the effects, like the disappearance of ice shelves, are going to be just as dramatic in the end. The same amount of water is going to be released, the same amount of global flooding is going to happen. So it happen more slowly.
And is there in the atmosphere, is there actually a partial separation between the air in the southern hemisphere and the air in the north, or does it all just completely mix? So if you get the big burst of methane up in the north, does that immediately spread around the planet, or does that basically stay up in the north there?
Well, it originates in the north, but it does spread around the planet, and there's some rather frightening global maps that you can see showing methane levels in the atmosphere, which you can measure very accurately now from satellite. And it's always showing that the highest level is in the north, in the Arctic. So that seems to be where the methane's coming from. But it does spread right around the planet, and so you do get an increase in methane level in the southern hemisphere as well. But the north is the drive.
And so methane, my understanding now that the total radiative forcing of the Antarctic.
Yes, I think it's not going to be suffering less, but it will suffer more slowly. I think the effects, like the disappearance of ice shelves, are going to be just as dramatic in the end. The same amount of water is going to be released, the same amount of global flooding is going to happen. But it will happen more slowly. And is there in the atmosphere, is there actually a partial separation between the air in the southern hemisphere and the air in the north, or does it all just completely mix? So if you get the big burst of methane up in the north, does that immediately spread around the planet, or does that basically stay up in the north there? Well, it originates in the north, but it does spread around the planet, and there's some rather frightening global maps that you can see showing methane levels in the atmosphere, which you can measure very accurately now from satellites.
Okay.
And it's always showing that the highest level is in the north, in the Arctic. So that seems to be where the methane's coming from. But it does spread right around the planet, and so you do get an increase in methane level in the southern hemisphere as well.
Yeah.
But the north is the driver.
Yeah, and so methane, my understanding now that the total like radiative forcing of methane is around about a third of that of the total footprint of CO2, is that correct?
Yes, it's been growing. This is it's been sneaking up on everybody. We thought that's other scientists not we, thought that methane had been conquered, and the fact that the methane level in the atmosphere reached a stable state about year 2000.
Yes.
For 10 years, so it's just stayed the same, and we thought, oh, we've conquered it. It wasn't clear how we conquered it.
Yeah.
We conquered it. But it suddenly started to rise again, and it's been rising very rapidly, and it's beginning to vie with carbon dioxide as the most powerful greenhouse gas.
Sure you don't want to come with me?
So beautiful, I'm gonna stay.
Good luck.
This marks the last day of the United States of America. By tomorrow, all mankind, and we will be visible from the Milky Way as a tiny little puff of smoke. I'm watching the earth crumble before my eyes. Giant ash cloud created by this super volcano will first envelop Vegas, and then St. Louis, and then Chicago, and then at long last, Washington, D.C. will have its lights go out.
That guy's crazy, right, Daddy?
I don't think so.
This is ridiculous. It's been over half an hour. I told you, the guy's a nut job.
Stop it, Gordon. No, hand me the phone again.
Nothing. Nothing.
I have goosebumps, people.